They applauded my daughter's gala while cash quietly drained from the church fund under a signature that looked like mine. Dad likes things simple, they said, simple enough, apparently, to spin my name in my silence. I wasn't the hero of the photos. I was the prop behind the light stand, the man expected to lift, lock up, and swallow the shortfall. The day the bank sent me that forged check image, the room tilted, family, faith, and every birthday I'd been told to keep small. That's when I learned the difference between anger and a boundary, and why sometimes the loudest line you can draw is to leave. Before today's story begins, we'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? Every time you share, it reminds us that these stories reach real people with real journeys. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time so you don't miss what's coming next. So pour yourself a drink, get comfortable, and let's step together into a story that just might stay with you long after it ends. I wake before the sun thins out the dark, the way I always do when the air is heavy and the cicadas have not made up their minds about singing. The fan pushes a tired river of warmth around my shotgun house, and my back reminds me in its polite, insistent way that the years have stacked up. I move slow, not because I am fragile, but because slowness keeps the pain from claiming more space than it should. New Orleans hums under the floorboards like a low, patient horn. The Gentilly street is still, porches squared up like open palms. A flyer from St. Augustine Community Church is tucked under the doorframe, the corner soft from humidity. I put it on the kitchen table where the morning light will find it later. I set water to boil for grits and lean on the counter while the kettle sighs. From somewhere down the block, a high school brass section warms scales. Ragged, valiant, unfinished. It sounds like boys becoming men, one sour note at a time. I used to measure mornings by how quickly I could get to the shop. I was a cabinet man, happiest with a hand plane shaving a ribbon of cedar thin enough to see light through. Then a disc in my back slipped like a card from the deck, and the work that fed me turned into a thing I had to respect from a distance. I retired early the way a man doesn't want to admit he's retreating. Now I stretch, I heat, I take the over-the-counter stuff, and I arrange my movements like dovetails, tight, deliberate, square. The shed out back holds tools I still oil out of respect. The chisel handles remember my grip. The block plane can shave paper if I ask nicely. They are patient company, the kind that doesn't press me for more than I can give. On the wall hangs a simple level, bubble poised between lines. Some days I stand and watch it center itself as if that were a prayer. Family shows up in frames before it shows up at the door. One photo is the three of us at Zara's ribbon cutting for Zara and North events. She stands bright and controlled, a bouquet of white roses climbing behind her like a wave frozen mid-crest. Miles has his mechanic's hands in his pockets, shoulders easy, eyes honest. I am slightly off-center in the frame, the way I usually am at her events, close enough to help, far enough not to interrupt the brand. We are cordial now, Vanessa and I, passing the kids back and forth across years like careful parcels. Birthdays live in the small spaces. Mine is a gumbo pot balanced over a single burner, supermarket sheet cake sweating under its plastic dome, a folding table pulled near the screen door for the breeze. I set my own plate, not out of sadness but habit. Zara's birthdays are all choreography and astonishment. Drone shots carving the air, floral walls constructed like Hollywood illusions, brass bands slipping through guests who pretend they are surprised. Instagram hums with captions that could sell bottled sunshine. At her parties, I am infrastructure with a heartbeat. I show up early to load chairs, run cords where nobody will trip, drive the rental truck, and lock up after the last sparkle is swept. People clap me on the shoulder, smiling that polite smile. "Mr. Gardner, you're a rock." The words are meant kindly, and they land like a compliment that forgot to include the person. I nod because that's expected and because kindness, however imprecise, still counts for something. Orders how I keep my blood pressure down. In a lined ledger, I track small loans and reimbursements. 50 here for flowers, 20 there for gas, 100 for the down payment on a photo booth. I write initials and dates and underline when a thing returns to me. This is not suspicion dressed as bookkeeping. This is the way I keep my mind from wandering into the swamp where grudges breed mosquitoes. Numbers make decent fences. Fences keep cattle and peace. After the divorce, I learned the math of lowered expectations. If I plan my own cake, no one forgets it. If I light the candle myself, no one scrambles for matches. I blow it out before the wax puddles, the way a man snuffs a lamp before sleep. Peace, I found, lives in routines that do not depend on anyone else to finish a sentence. Peace can be a small plate and a clean counter. There is a sentence I hear often about me, said with affection that doesn't quite ask permission. Folks say, I like things simple. I have liked them simple. That's true. But somewhere along the line, simple became a passcode others used to justify giving me less time, less notice, less seat at the table. When did preference turn into permission for neglect? I file the question quietly, as if it were a screw saved for later. Evenings here settle like a quilt. The street lights hum softly and the porch rails glow the color of tea. I sweep the steps because it soothes me to see order accumulate in neat ridges of dust. Across the way, Uncle Terence lifts a hand as he heads in, the day done. I return the gesture and listen for the river in the distance. You don't hear the Mississippi proper, not really. You feel its patient insistence in your bones. Back inside, I return the ledger to the shelf and sit for a breath, letting the heat pad do its small mercy. My eyes find another frame on the mantel. Zara at a 3-tier cake. Confetti caught midair, her face lifted to a future she is practicing in public. I am there, blurred behind a light stand, moving something heavy from one side of the room to the other. It is a good picture. It tells the truth. It knows how to tell. I turn off the lamp and the house listens with me. The fan keeps time. The dark finds its level. I am a man who keeps things running, even when no one notices the sound of the engine. I am a man who believes in quiet as a tool. For now, that is enough. For now, the balance holds as steady as a bubble between two lines, and I promise myself I will see in the morning if it still does. I remember the river night for how the air felt, not what any thermometer said. The gala sat under a white tent like a sail pinned to the lawn, uplights licking the cypress trunks while a drone traced lazy circles over the moonlit water. It was Zara's 10-year anniversary for Zara and North events, the kind of milestone that asks a city to look up and applaud its own reflection. I parked the rented box truck where the dock boss pointed and watched truss lift into place, cable runs combed flat, and temporary flooring laid smooth enough to keep heels from catching. I kept to the edges and did what I've always done, let the work happen close to my hands without claiming it as mine. Inside, rehearsal noise slipped into showtime rhythm. Air handlers pushed Manufactured October across a swampy evening, and the bass nudged the platform like a second pulse under my feet. I held a door for a florist, shouldering an arch of white roses bowed into a question mark, petals cold from the van. Beyond her, an MC rehearsed a speech about grit, family, and a certain father who likes things simple. When the program started, the line drew a polished laugh and a tidy round of clapping, the kind that agrees with a story trimmed to fit a frame. The applause moved over me like breeze through grass, present, impersonal, already leaving. Miles stayed back of house the way a good HVAC tech does when the air ought to remain invisible. He coiled cables in practice loops, tapped power strips with a knuckle, shifted sandbags just outside the camera lanes, and vanished before the photographer could turn him into an extra. We crossed near the generator truck and traded a quiet nod that meant we were both where we belonged. His eyes were steady, his shoulders held the shape of a man learning to carry. Pride opened in me like a door, and right beside it came a worry I couldn't name. Pretty light always has a bill. I wanted him to learn that part before the bill learned him. After midnight, I drove home with the tense glow still hitchhiking in my sight. Ritual helps me sleep, so I pulled out the volunteer ledger for St. Augustine Community Church, the fund I watch because order needs a witness. I ran the month against the bank statements and felt the numbers stutter. The balance was short by several thousand, not swallowed in one gulp, but sipped in careful mouthfuls. The dates made a quiet constellation around Zara's last productions, dots that didn't accuse, but they didn't shrug either. I set a neat question mark in the margin and breathed through the small fire my back likes to start when I sit too long. The ledger lay steady, a plank across moving water. Morning brought a call from the bank's fraud desk, a voice warm as a blanket laid over a script. They wanted to confirm a check to Zara and North Logistics, signed Otis G. I asked for an image. When it landed in my inbox, I knew it the way a cabinet man knows his tools. The G curled wrong, the T dragged a wandering tail, close enough for haste, wrong enough for me. I saved the picture to a folder with the date, then saved the folder again to a thumb drive. Redundancy keeps truth from going missing when tempers start looking for shortcuts. I put the phone in my pocket and turned the kitchen faucet. It coughed from the leaky neck, pipes knocking a nervous rhythm inside the wall. I washed my hands as if water could lift grit from the skin and carry it away without argument. Rage would have burned quick and clean, but disappointment settled heavier and, strangely, more useful. A heavy thing can be braced. A heavy thing can be set down without breaking. I dried my hands, folded the towel on its seam, and let the room climb back to its ordinary quiet. The house knows how to keep me company when words would only get in the way. Simple has been my word for years, but lately I hear it wearing a different suit. Folks say it to excuse smaller cakes, smaller seats, smaller asks of care. Maybe I taught them to use it that way. Maybe I left the door ajar. Either way, it has become a master key, opening rooms I never meant to leave unlocked. I wrote the word on a scrap of paper and looked until it stopped meaning what it claimed. Labels can shrink a man if he isn't watchful. Once they shrink him, the world rearranges itself around the smaller outline and calls it fate. At noon, I found a leftover birthday candle in the junk drawer, stubby and bent from summers. I pressed it into a saucer and lit it just to see. The wax pooled too fast, tilted toward a small gouge in the tabletop, and dripped like a patient confession. The room smelled of sugar and faint smoke. I capped the flame with a spoon and watched the wick go dark, a tiny thing that had said enough for one day. I set the saucer in the sink and listened to the house breathe around me the way an old dog settles after making 3 circles. Sunday placed me back on a wooden pew at St. Augustine. Reverend Marcus Ellery preached about forgiveness and stewardship, 2 words braided like rope. Stewardship landed in my pocket and stayed there like a flat river stone you keep to remember a place. During announcements, I kept the ledger on my knee and traced a transfer labeled Z and N promo. I added 2 small question marks and shut the book. My prayer had no fireworks. Let the numbers line up with the truth and let my temper trail behind it instead of out in front. That evening, the house was quiet in the way that makes sound travel. At the kitchen table, I unfolded a tourist pamphlet Miles had stuffed into the mail pile, a budget tour of Kyoto with maple leaves the color of rust and wooden bridges drawn like sentences paused in the right place. A paper map tucked inside showed a blue river bending through a city laid out in careful blocks. I followed the line with a finger until the name Kyoto sat under my nail, like a small bell I could hear but could not yet name aloud. It didn't sound like revenge, it sounded like reclamation. I scanned the check image into the same folder as the ledger PDFs and gave each file a name that would make sense to a stranger. Outside, deep in the neighborhood, a brass line eased into a tune I grew up with and then turned a corner. Inside, something in me tuned to it, not louder, just clearer. I slid the folder into the drawer like a tool put away between cuts and stood at the sink long enough to hear the pipe settle. The thought did not stay in the drawer. It traveled with me into the night and took the seat where anger used to sit. Morning comes in a clean stripe across the kitchen table, bright enough to turn paper into small mirrors. I set my lined ledger on the left and the printed check images on the right, and let coffee go cold while my back soaks up the soft thrum of the heating pad. The signature on the printout looks like something wearing my name without having earned it. The tail on the T wanders like a river in flood, the curl on the G is eager where mine is cautious, and the spacing clamps words too tight, as if they were bracing for impact. I write the date on the corner, steady as a carpenter, marking a true edge, then slide both sheets into a plastic sleeve labeled with a pen that doesn't run. At the bank, the branch light is polite and a little too clean. A clerk clicks through a screen and references a power of attorney from 2017, widening access for emergencies. I nod as if remembering, but in my bones I know I did not sign a door that wide. They print me a copy. The witness initials lean like tired fence posts, and the signature sways just enough to tell on itself. I put the paper in my folder, thank the clerk, and step back into air I can trust. Outside, a streetcar grumbles past. The rails don't flinch. On the drive home, my phone taps the dash with a text from Zara asking if I can come cut wood for a massive backdrop for her upcoming birthday week. I look at the screen, at the light pleasant as advertisement, and type 2 words I rarely spend on family. I'm busy. The dots bloom, vanish, bloom again, then nothing. The silence doesn't sting. It lands with the dull honesty of an object put down on the right shelf. The call from Vanessa finds me at the sink. She sounds composed, efficient, her voice wrapped around purpose the way ribbon wraps a gift. She says not to make it hard, that our daughter's brand runs on momentum, phrasing it like weather. I dry my hands, watch water slip along the rim of the basin, and keep my answer level. Whose money is that momentum? The quiet that follows is air without temperature. She ends the call without a goodbye. Fault lines are usually quiet until they aren't. Order is my answer to heat. Back home, I clear the table and build a small architecture of evidence. Church ledger scans, bank images, event invoices with dates, photos of the gala where the generator footprint lines up with the night the balance thinned. I make a folder called TrueHand/03 and copy everything twice. One set to a thumb drive taped inside the back cover of my notebook. Measure twice, cut once, has moved from the shop into the part of life where wood is made of numbers. That evening, the shed holds the kind of cool that smells like metal and old pine. Miles leans in the doorway with dust on his shirt and the day still breathing off him. He tells me he saw thick donation envelopes with St. Augustine letterhead stacked by the reception desk at Zara and North events. He thought they were sponsorships, the way nonprofits tip their hats when a company steps up. I don't let him finish the guess. Observe. Don't guess. He nods and sets the thought down where we can both see it. A handshake turns into a quick hug that leaves a line of sawdust across my sleeve like a signature I'd rather carry. Pain nags the way a small dog does when you ignore it. Instead of whiskey, I choose ice and stretching, counting slow, while the cold teaches the ache to unclench. In my journal, I write a single sentence. Tomorrow, price the distance. The line sits there like a length of oak I haven't cut yet. On the TV, a news segment about nonprofit audits sours into commercials, and I press the power button before someone sells me forgiveness on a 6-month plan. Stewardship is a plumb line I hold steady with both hands. I draft questions for St. Augustine's Finance Committee, dates, authorizations, vendors, descriptions. 3 line items crowd close to Zara and North activations, enough proximity to make me mark their margins in yellow. I put the list under a magnet on the fridge and stand there long enough to feel the idea of boundaries solidify like concrete that will be ready to walk on by morning. Zara sends a voice note bright with hurry, like a smile stretched over a deadline. I listen once, then delete the download and reply with the same refusal as before, each word square in its joints. I set the phone face down and walk the block, counting porch lights and letting the long whistle of a freight train write a straight line through my head. The neighborhood keeps its own integrity. The books will have to learn that. Back in the kitchen, I open an accordion folder full of travel brochures, old daydreams I never took to the airport. The Kyoto pamphlet miles left shows maple leaves like rust on water and a bridge drawn with a patience I respect. I write a sticky note, birthday/leave town/do not announce, and park it under the crescent moon magnet. It is not a revenge vow, it is logistics for reclaiming space I paid for. The anonymous email arrives when the sun slants gold across the floor. Subject line, for your stewardship. The address is masked, the body has 2 attachments, an audio file and a draft thank you letter pre-filled to praise Zara and North Events as community partners. I press play and sit still. A woman who sounds like Vanessa and a man who sounds like Reverend Marcus Ellery talk about borrowing from the fund and repaying after the campaign, stepping carefully around plain words like they were puddles in Sunday shoes. I listen again with a notebook, noting timestamps, adjectives that soften theft, vowels that stiffen under stress. I print the draft letter and mark its margin with the carpenter's symbol I use to tag a true piece. Not approval, a private promise. This will square later. I don't forward anything. Chain of custody is a tool like any other. I label a subfolder audio_ref/tw-a, copy the files and write an index card. Verify source before moving. From somewhere down the block, a brass riff rises and hangs, a bridge in a song waiting for the chorus to earn it. I click off the lamp and let the room hold the weight. On the fridge, the sticky note glows a little in the leftover light, a small lighthouse that doesn't blink. The house breathes, the pipe settles, and the next step waits without tapping its foot. I set the morning the way a carpenter sets a jig. Everything square, everything reachable. The expanding file holds the bank images, the 2017 Power of Attorney copy, the ledger deltas, and the transcript I made from the anonymous audio. I reread each page until the type feels less like accusation and more like measurement. In the pocket notebook, I write a brief. Clarify, don't combust. Ask, don't argue. Document, don't dramatize. A heat patch warms the small country of my lower back. Coffee rides in a steel mug that won't sweat on the table. I sanded smooth last spring. The sky over Gentilly is a patient gray that lets details show. The cafe on Esplanade smells like beans and lemon cleaner. Chalk letters list seasonal syrups I won't order. I choose the chair angled to the window so I can watch the sidewalk without watching the door. Zara arrives dressed in a color that photographs well, phone face down, but blinking under her palm like a restless eye. We do the civilized choreography. I place a tidy stack between us, the check image to Zara and North Logistics, the church ledger shortfalls that trace a pale constellation around her shows, the POA with witness initials that lean wrong. I wait long enough for the paper to speak. Help me understand these dates, I say, and leave the words on the table like tools for anyone to pick up. She leans forward and smooths her tone into presentation. Cash flow timing, she says, and something about post-campaign settlement and brand momentum. The phrases fit perfectly into the air conditioning. Her watch taps the wood when she gestures. Her calendar lights the phone with blocks of color. I record start and stop times in my notebook and paraphrase her points as neutrally as a man can when he is also a father. I ask whether St. Augustine authorized any bridge transfers in writing. She pivots to community partnership and understood support. I write very small, no authorization doc produced. The room hums as if it has agreed not to take sides. I could mention the audio then, the careful voices talking about borrowing from the fund. I don't. Chain of custody is a straight line you keep straight by not decorating it. We part with the same manners we arrived in. Outside, the heat hangs its arm over my shoulders and walks me to the truck. Reverend Marcus Ellery keeps a tidy office that could be a brochure for tidy faith. Framed verses square their corners against the wall. Posters about stewardship smile without moving. Lemon Cleaner has the last word. He gestures me to a chair and folds his hands in a way that suggests healing is available here if you agree to call the wound another name. He speaks of forgiveness, unity, reputational harm. Numbers appear only as clouds on a distant horizon that might or might not rain. I answer quietly that banks expect numbers. He nods like a man blessing a complication. I jot the dates he passes over with the care of a surveyor, marking where a lot line should be but isn't on paper. Back home, I build a spreadsheet the way I used to build drawers that slide without complaint. Date, amount, MOMO line, event title, vendor, reference number, conditional formatting. Light's little flares, where church transactions and Zara and North outflows sit close enough to catch each other's sleeve. PDFs linked to cells. File name carries a timestamp so the future can remember the sequence of the present. Measure twice, cut once shifts into check twice, speak once, and the keyboard becomes a plane shaving thin curls of confusion off a stubborn board. I draft a letter with 3 points plain enough to read out loud without flinching. Full restitution to the volunteer fund, cancellation of the birthday week VIP series, and an internal apology to the finance committee. No public posts, no hashtags, just the kind of repair that counts because it is counted. The rationale is not punishment but scaffolding. Protect the congregation, end the float, rebuild controls that should never have been optional. I print 2 copies, seal them in envelopes, and hand-deliver one to Zara's office, one to the Reverend's desk. I note delivery times because a clock is a witness no one can intimidate. The refusal lands before dinner. Zara's message is polished sorrow wrapped around a number. Brand damaging, she says. Vendors are committed, influencers booked, schedules hard like poured resin. I picture a wall made of hashtags, glossy, echoing, where words like stewardship and restitution slide down and pool at the base without leaving a mark. I log her refusal, close the message thread, and let the room remain undecorated by rage. The body wants release. I give it ice and a stretch, not whiskey and a story. In the journal I write, restitution offered, declined. Hold the plumb line. I read the anonymous transcript once more, then seal it back into its sleeve like a specimen. If there is a next move, it must be lawful and clean. I am too old to fight in mud and too young to pretend mud is a spa treatment. The house holds still while I think, the kind of stillness that lets thought thicken to rope. At the desk, I open Miles's Kyoto pamphlet and run a back-of-napkin budget against the quiet pile of savings I built by saying no to things no one noticed I refused. Price, routes, dates, the numbers meet in the middle like 2 men who respect each other's time. I book a first-class ticket for my birthday. The confirmation email pings and settles into a folder named Personal/Reclamation. It is not spectacle. It is a boundary in a language people understand, absence. I make small adjustments to how I can be reached. Group texts get muted, family threads go quiet on my end. I draft a public statement, then delete it before the period. Presence has been misread for years. Words can wait their turn behind verified documents. I print my itinerary and slide it into a manila envelope labeled only with the date. The envelope waits on the console table like an honest witness who doesn't need attention to do his job. Night lowers itself onto the roof with the soft weight of a quilt. The sticky note on the fridge, birthday/leave town/do not announce, remains under the crescent moon magnet as if the moon itself agreed to keep the secret. On the laptop, a green cell fades to gray when I close the file, the way a workshop light warms down after you flip the switch. I place my passport on top of the expanding file and watch the two rectangles share the same square of table. Order and departure, side by side, pointing into a weather I am finally willing to meet. I arrive in Kyoto under a pale birthday sky, the kind that doesn't announce itself so much as open the door and step aside. The flight is quiet in the way first class is designed to be. Names pronounced correctly, a towel folded into a white idea of care, shoulder unknotted by a seat that remembers angles. When wheels kiss runway, I feel something loosen I hadn't realized I was clenching. The taxi glides past low eaves and narrow streets. Steam lifts from vents, bicycles lean against walls like punctuation, and every corner seems to have decided what it wants to be. My room sits high enough to see the ridgeline of Higashiyama stacked in patient shades. The light comes through like it has passed inspection. A kettle clicks, tatami breathes its clean straw into the air. I set my passport on the desk, take out a small glass, and pour a thumb of sake as if to mark an opening. The photo I make is nothing more than a glass near a window and a city beyond it. The caption reads, 56 today. Paid for, by me no hashtags, no faces. I set the phone face down and walk out into a lane paved with stone that holds the day steady under my shoes. Hours later, the screen blinks a constellation of missed calls. Zara's name repeats in a climbing chorus. Vanessa's sits there like a headline. Reverend Ellery, Aunt Nadine, Uncle Terrence. The finance committee thread lit up as if someone bumped a switch. In the family chat, a cousin tags Zara's handle under my photo with a question, and another cousin posts a memory of me fixing a porch swing in August heat. A deacon's wife asks whether the church blessed this trip. A comment quotes that old line about me liking things simple. I do not engage. I make 3 screenshots, context, timestamps, names, file them in a folder called travel/proof of absence, and let the rest float downstream. Zara's messages arrive in a sequence that reads like weather moving in. The first is a light, "Wow, where are you?" The next asks me to call. The next is sharper, pointing out that this is hurting mom, and that people are reading into it. A voicemail follows using phrases like optics, brand safety, and tone. I open my notebook and write their times and the exact nouns. I close the notebook. The room stays as calm as it was before I pressed play. When Vanessa calls, I answer once. Her voice is controlled the way a person holds a platter in a crowded room. She asks how I funded this, whether someone is helping me. I say one word and leave it there. Mine. The line is quiet in the way a hallway is quiet after a door clicks. She exhales and says, "We should talk when I get back." We will. The call ends without ceremony, and I stand a moment to verify that my own pulse has stayed in its lane. The wider circle sniffs the wind. Aunt Nadine posts a line that sounds like a blessing and a warning. Sometimes the quiet ones book the loudest tickets. It gathers likes among cousins who remember my pickup truck at their graduations. A man from church sends a private message asking whether stewardship includes flying first class. I do not answer. I capture the message and archive it where it belongs. The myth about me bends, not loud but audibly, like a plank taking its true shape under weight. Email lands from counsel for Zara and North Events accusing me of defamation by implication and demanding I remove the post and issue a clarification. I forward it to Tanya Huang with a line that says what needs saying. Please advise. All records intact. We schedule a call that will be evening here and morning there. I put the kettle on instead of watching the little typing dots dance. I open my laptop for a video call with the bank's fraud and POA unit. We walk through the 2017 document, and I request a freeze on any transactions related to it. I recite reference numbers and dates like coordinates to a pilot. They issue a case number and promise a written confirmation by email and USPS. When the confirmation arrives, I file it with the care I'd reserve for a mortise that finally seats flush. Control clicks into place. The click is audible if you know where to listen. Tanya writes back with something colder than anger and more useful. There is a 2021 addendum to the POA that attempts to extend reach to my retirement assets, signed on the day an ER record shows I was admitted for acute back pain and medicated. The hospital confirms I was not in any condition to sign. CCTV stills show Vanessa and an unfamiliar advisor near administration. The chill that moves through me is steady, not sharp. I file each attachment into POA/forensic and sit with the feeling until it becomes information. Tanya recommends a litigation hold, letters to St. Augustine and to Zara and North instructing preservation of emails, texts, Slack logs, accounting software records. I authorize it and ask that the tone be factual. We do not shout at paper. We stack it. I type a memo for myself. Stewardship greater than optics. The work here is to protect a fund, into practice, rebuild the rails so the future doesn't drift into the river. My back pulses a reminder when I start to scroll. I don't. I go out and walk along the Kamigawa, using the river's margin as a straight edge. Stone lanterns punctuate the path like deliberate commas. My breath settles into my steps. I say a line under my breath the way a man checks his level. Plumb line steady. By the time I return to the hotel, the storm on my screen is the same size it was, but I am not. Reverend Ellery emails suggesting internal reconciliation and asking me to offer my perspective for our records. I attach the same 3-point proposal I made before: restitution, cancel the VIP week, and an internal apology. And I add the bank's case number. No new arguments, just anchors. I BCC Tanya because integrity likes a witness. The sin sound is small and sufficient. Back in the group chat, factions draft themselves. A cousin resharing my photo writes that boundaries are not betrayals. Another relative posts a defense of Zara's ambition. An older deacon warns about airing linens. I do nothing visible. On an index card I write, "No edits to post." Archive only silence for once speaks in my dialect. Document backed, uninterested in applause. Rain freckles the window and turns the neon outside into watercolor. On the desk, my passport, the expanding file, the bank's confirmation, and Tanya's forensic note sit aligned like tools set out for tomorrow's cut. I open a clean page and write a title: Decisions I Own. Down the margin, I draw a straight line and wait for the ink to dry. In the hallway, the kettle clicks a second time, as if to say, the water is ready. The work is too. If you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, comment one below to let me know you're with me. Choices are about to cost. Morning finds me before the bell does. The rain has rinsed the city to a quieter grain, and the ridge of Higashiyama sits like a level held steady against a pale sky. I make tea and pull hotel stationery toward me, drawing 3 columns in a careful hand. Bury it. Blow it up. Build it right. I write under each in small, exact words, as if the page were a bench that has to hold weight. My back registers its usual complaint and then recedes. The heat from the cup meets the ache halfway. The window cracks a finger's width to let the wet air in. I breathe once like a man testing a joint he just glued. I set the expanding file on the desk and lay its contents out in rows. Bank freeze confirmation at the top. Printouts of the forged signature and the curious 2017 power of attorney under it. Tanya's email about the 2021 addendum, the ER record proving I could not have signed, and 2 CCTV stills with Vanessa and an unfamiliar advisor in the frame near administration. Counsel's threat letter, screenshots from family group chat. I restate the core under my breath. Stewardship requires sunlight and locks. Drafts that sound like victory laps get folded and slid aside. The actions that travel well in court and in a finance committee minute stay on the desk like tools I know how to use. Tanya and I meet across time zones on a secure call. Her voice carries the dry clarity I take as a favor. She recaps litigation holds sent to St. Augustine and to Zara and North, orders to preserve email, text, Slack, accounting logs. Options line up like routes on a map, demand plus private mediation, civil filing if stalled, DA referral if the forgery clears the threshold. I choose sequence instead of spectacle, hold then a narrow window for quiet repair, escalate only if we're offered a shrug. I ask that every sentence in the letters sit on a date, an amount, or a policy. She agrees. We are not making a storm, we are naming weather. I draft a one-page memo to Reverend Ellery with the plainest title I can stand. Restoration Path. 4 points, each hitched to a number. Reimburse the volunteer fund within 7 days. Halt the birthday week VIP series. Order an independent audit and adopt a 2-signature rule. Acknowledge the breach to the Finance Committee in writing. No sermons, no adjectives. I attach an excerpt of the spreadsheet that flags transfers clustered around Zara's shows and lists the bank case number in the header. I send it and BCC Tanya, then set a firm deadline that can't be mistaken for suggestion. 2 messages go to family that same hour because clarity deserves company. To Vanessa, all future questions go via counsel. I will not discuss funding. To Zara, see the proposal sent to Reverend Ellery. My position stands. I screenshot the outbox timestamps and put the phone face down. Grief sits in the room, not dramatic, just real, like a chair no one offered, but that you're using anyway. It is here, but it doesn't steer. I draft a public clarification and delete it before the period. Anything I say online becomes stock for someone else's brand soup. The Kyoto Post remains as it is. I turn off comments on past photos that invite debate. Silence, properly tended, becomes a kind of instrument. You play the rests, not only the notes. The work is not to feed watchers. It is to fix a leak. I put on my jacket and walk the Kamogawa, counting bridges like chapters. Breath in 4 beats, step in 4 beats, rain needling the river into small rehearsals of light. In the pocket notebook, I write a single line I can live by. I am not punishing, I am preventing. A runner nods without slowing, and the nod feels like the city has endorsed the sentence with a stamp I didn't ask for. The Reverend replies with an invitation to a listening session behind closed doors, soft words sewn into a soft net. He praises unity, gestures at reputational care, and never touches the audit or the halt. I highlight his evasions in yellow. My answer returns the memo and the deadline. Nothing new added. To compensate is to account, not to convene. The send sound is tiny and sufficient, like a nail driven until the head sits flush. Zara's counter-proposal arrives wrapped in apology and urgency. Vendors will penalize. Influencers are contracted. Could we meet in the middle by delaying restitution and postponing the audit until after the campaign? I mark the phrase meet in the middle and write beside it, middle of what? A false compromise protects the practice, not the people. I reply with one line, restitution precedes narrative, and close the thread before polish can wear me down. Procedural work steadies the pulse. I call the bank to add a directive. No disbursements from the church account without 2 verified signers. The POA remains frozen pending investigation. They assign an addendum reference. I print the email and drop it into the file. The finance chair gets a short note with the update. This is a control a sermon cannot undo. A small click inside me says the mortise is true. Miles checks in on video between jobs, eyes rimmed with fatigue and resolve. He says he'll steer clear of Zara's office for a few days to dodge requests that aren't his to carry. I tell him, you don't pick sides. You pick your craft. He nods and we let the silence say the rest. When the call ends, I feel the relief of knowing my boy will not be recruited as a courier for adults who should carry their own paper. Tanya's mediation invites go out, to the church, to Zara and North, with a neutral retired judge proposed and a 7-day window set. I approve and add a single sentence. The goal is restitution and governance repair. I move my return flight up a day to stand in the room if standing helps. The itinerary prints clean. I slide it into the manila envelope that hides in plain sight on the console table. Before the day closes, I write 2 lists in the notebook. What I will not do: no public shaming, no leaks, no late-night calls, no alcohol decisions. What I will: log everything, rest, eat, pray, walk. The act of writing is a laminate, thin layers of intention pressed until they hold. Night blurs the city into soft geometry. I sign my initials in the corner of the memo titled Decisions I Own and close the folder. The passport sits beside it, 2 rectangles of resolve and motion sharing a square of desk. Somewhere in the wet dark, a temple bell stretches a single note across the distance. I hear it as a warning against pettiness and a blessing on the work, and I let both meanings stand. Tomorrow will ask for the same steadiness. I am ready to give it. I got home a day early, just like I'd planned, from the hotel desk. The dusk was thicker here, humid enough to sit on a shoulder, cicadas as steady as a watch you can hear but cannot see. My suitcase thumped over the familiar crack in the walk, and the porch light threw its small halo on the rail like it had been holding my place. The key found its way without thinking. The house smelled faintly of pine cleaner and paper, which is to say, it smelled like order. The inbox did not wait politely. St. Augustine's Finance Committee had called an emergency session, subject line all caps and brisk. The agenda attached used the plain nouns I had been asking for: fund irregularities, POA freeze, interim controls. On top of that stack sat the bank's formal confirmation. The 2017 power of attorney frozen, 2-signer directive installed, reference numbers printed bold on letterhead that carried weight. I printed 2 copies for redundancy, slid one into the expanding file, and laid the other by my notebook with a yellow tab. The fellowship hall had the same linoleum shine as always, folding chairs angled toward a dented coffee maker doing its best impression of cheer. Deacons and long-timers sat with paper agendas in their laps, pens ready as if ready would be enough. Reverend Ellery opened with unity language, gentle, measured, and then offered to step back from disbursement, oversight pending review. A soft concession padded with concern. The committee did the right procedural things, minuted the freeze, adopted dual approvals while we waited, and assigned a deacon to solicit an outside auditor shortlist. The room sighed the way wood sighs when a load is finally distributed. Back home, another packet waited, a letter from Vanessa's attorney proposing a make-whole transfer within 7 days, provided there was no public attribution of fault, and a mutual non-disparagement clause broad enough to cover a small county. I annotated in pencil, underlines under without admission, question marks by mutual, a box around no attribution. I sent it to Tanya with a note that restitution was the point. Narrative bandages would need trimming. I didn't answer directly. I was done writing back to paper that told good stories without counting. Zara posted her version to her audience, a square of polished regret about confusion and temporary accounting alignment, a promise that community partnership remains strong. The comments braided themselves into predictable rope, loyal voices clapping the brand, sharper voices from church asking about stewardship with real names attached. I took screenshots of the post and a half-dozen representative comments, stamped them with time, and filed them. I did not type a word. Silence carries better when you stop adding weight to it. Miles came through the door at 8 with a duffel and a toolbox, the kind of arrival that doesn't need announcing. He set the bag down by the hall tree and without consulting put a pot of red beans and rice on the stove while I rinsed the andouille under the tap. We cooked like we've always worked, quiet, competent, shoulder to shoulder. He told me about an install with a clogged condensate line and a cat that rode his ladder. I told him the committee had adopted dual approvals. We ate with the screen door open to the porch and the day's heat easing its grip, and there was a peace in that ordinary table I did not take for granted. Neighbors did their porch diplomacy rounds the next afternoon. A bag of beignets appeared on the rail, dusted like first snow. Uncle Terence paused at the steps and tipped his chin. "You good?" I told him I was steady. Aunt Nadine tucked a folded note in the mailbox later, 5 words in her clear hand: "Proud you stood steady." I put it in the family tray and let the ink settle in me where applause never reaches. Across the blocks, a brass line practiced a tune from somebody's garage, a train threw its long, bone-deep horn, and a small rain started like someone easing rice into a pot. The Finance Committee asked whether I would remain as volunteer fund steward. I said yes with a condition: independent audit first, then formal adoption of controls in writing. Stewardship needs paper before it needs faces. I drafted a 2-page memo that night: scope of audit, a timeline with dates you could hang a coat on, quarterly reporting cadence, the 2 signature rule spelled plain: no adjectives, no heroics. I emailed it for the next meeting's vote and printed a clean copy for my file. By dark, the kitchen table had turned into a small post office. I sorted into labeled trays: bank, church, council, family, mediation. I logged the hours spent, who called whom, what copies went where. Record-keeping steadies the nervous system. You make rows and the mind falls into step. Somewhere between the second and third tray, I remembered the dream from Kyoto. A lantern lettered with a single word: return, floating on water that did not argue. Return as in repay, return as in come back to yourself. The memory lay down beside the work and helped it breathe. Tanya confirmed the mediation date by email. It landed on my 57th birthday. I wrote the date in the notebook without commentary, then outlined my prep. A 1-page goal statement limited to restitution and governance repair, a summary of exhibits, an index keyed to bank references so no one had to pretend to remember. I promised myself I would carry no sarcasm into the room. Sarcasm burns the speaker first. The back protested after hours at the table. I took the hint, stretched, showered, left the whiskey bottle as decoration. Standing by the kitchen window, I said a small prayer I have come to trust: keep the plumb line true. Not for victory, not for shame, just for accuracy. Miles clicked off the kitchen light on his way down the hall, and the house accepted the night like a task completed. When quiet finally collected, the table's still life felt sufficient. 2 bowls clean and upside down to dry. A folded agenda with a check mark in the corner. The bank letter clipped with a yellow tab like a good flag. Through the screen, the rain stitched the porch into a soft gray screen. Street lights fuzzed to halos, the neighborhood sleeping in its own good conscience. I slid the mediation folder to the top of the stack and set my pen across it. Repair, not revenge, is work. In the morning, I would go do some more. The morning comes equal parts gray and merciful. Rain beads along the porch rail like a line of small decisions, and the house carries the soft hush of a church before anyone sings. Miles hands me a mug and doesn't add advice to the steam. I skim the mediation folder one last time. Restoration path memo, bank freeze confirmations, spreadsheet excerpts, the litigation hold letters, and the Kyoto page proving I said nothing beyond that single post. In the notebook, I write: repair greater than performance. Facts greater than feelings. Protect the fund. Protect the boy. Before I lock the door, my phone hums. Tanya has sent a short email stamped urgent. The attachments are blunt instruments dressed as PDFs, a message thread between Reverend Ellery and Zara proposing to rename community support as media partnership, a templated contract routed through a shell agency Vanessa formed last year, and the registration papers that prove the shell is not a story. Metadata timestamps sit shoulder to shoulder with the dates of suspicious transfers. I print the lot, tab them TWC/reclassification scheme, and add a note. Present only if necessary. The mediation office is all glass and silence management, white noise hiss, neutral carpet, a retired judge whose face looks like it was carved to hold two truths at once. We sit in the long room under steady light. On our side, Tanya and me, one pen and one memo on the table to remind myself restraint is a tool. Across, Zara, Vanessa, and their counsel with legal pads in formation. At the end, Reverend Ellery and a church representative from the Finance Committee. The mediator explains the rules in a voice that sounds like a slow faucet. We will speak in turns, we will not rehearse our best speeches. We will search for terms work can live inside. Tanya opens like a carpenter laying a square on a corner. Ledger variances. The bank freeze. The 2017 power of attorney irregularities plus the 2021 addendum signed while an ER wristband says I could not sign. The goal is restitution and governance repair. No adjectives. Opposing counsel leans on misunderstandings, temporary float, no intent to harm, and the danger that reputations might bruise. The mediator distills the points into three questions: how to restore funds, how to install controls, and how to prevent the room from becoming a theater. I slide forward the spreadsheet excerpt where dates cluster around Zara and North events, each cell tied to a reference number. When counsel reaches for partnership framing, Tanya introduces TWC, unrolling the email string, the shell agency registration, and the draft contract bearing Vanessa's new entity. The room temperature drops without the thermostat moving. The mediator calls a recess so counsel can become reacquainted with the facts they hoped were out to lunch. In caucus, Tanya asks whether I want a public admission. I don't. I want a letter to the Finance Committee stating facts. I want restitution in days, not quarters. I want an independent audit and a two-signature rule that outlives any of us. No humiliation. Yes, accountability, I write in the notebook, and then add a line to shield Miles from requests and retaliation tied to this mess. He works with air. I want his days clear of smoke. They return with chips to trade. Repayment within 7 days, they say, but no admission. Postpone the audit until the fourth quarter and use soft language about process improvements. Tanya declines delay. She proposes repayment in 7 calendar days, auditor chosen from a neutral shortlist, immediate adoption of the two-signer policy, confidential letter to the Finance Committee acknowledging the transfers and the correction. Vanessa asks for broader non-disparagement. Tanya narrows it until the clause fits only the matter at hand. The documents do their own preaching. Confronted with TWC, the Reverend offers to step back from oversight and support an independent audit. The mediator edits support into vote for and reads it back until the words sound like a hinge that has found its pin. The church representative agrees to call a special meeting within 10 days to formalize the controls. Relief and embarrassment mingle on faces that know both hymns. Zara speaks, and for once it is not a pitch. Payroll, vendor penalties, a fear that the brand would collapse if the lights dimmed even a little. She does not quarrel with numbers. I say one line and let it work. Restitution precedes narrative. It lands without flourish, and the room lets go of its last pocket of denial the way a knuckle relaxes after holding a bag too long. The mediator drafts the term sheet in bullet points that can carry weight. Full restitution to the volunteer fund within 7 days, wire instructions attached. Immediate two-signer policy. POA privileges suspended pending investigation. Committee vote calendared. Independent audit within 21 days. Auditor from a 3-name neutral shortlist. Confidential letter of acknowledgement to the Finance Committee. No public statements beyond administrative corrections. Mutual non-disparagement limited strictly to this subject matter. Miles named and shielded against requests or retaliation. We initial the sheet. The judge sets a check-in date. Paper, once again, becomes the room's adult. Tanya collects copies and scans them into the secure app. I photograph only the signature page and the mediator's cover for my archive. Calendar entries bloom on my phone. Wire deadline, audit window, vote date, check-in. I send the finance chair a plain sentence. Term sheet signed, details to follow. The reply is a short prayer made of thanks and punctuation. Vanessa gestures toward the hallway for a family talk. I shake my head. We will speak when money moves and controls are real. Outside, damp air and tire hiss hold the city to a workable volume. I stop at a corner shop and buy a small slice of king cake, not to celebrate but to mark that a day can be both hard and correct. The receipt slips into my pocket, date-stamped proof that not all evidence lives behind glass. At home, Miles tilts his head in the question he keeps spare. I give him the essentials and leave the rest where it belongs, leftovers warm in the pot. We eat without the TV, knives tapping plates like good-natured metronomes. When the dishes are done, I file the term sheet, update the exhibit index, and write one sentence. Agreement is the beginning of work. I stretch my back before it asks loudly and set a timer for tomorrow's calls. On the table, the mediation folder wears a fresh clip. A clean legal pad waits under a title. Audit and Controls. Tasks. Through the screen door, the rain eases to a damp rumor, the kind that keeps dust down without drowning anything. I turn off the lamp and leave the hallway light low, a small signal to myself. The hard part is not the noise, it is the follow-through. Tomorrow I will make the calls, send the emails, and measure until the line holds true. 2 mornings after mediation, my phone chimed with a sound I had assigned to good news but rarely heard. A bank push notification blinked on the screen, small and factual. Full wire received into the St. Augustine Volunteer Fund. Numbers before narratives. I opened the banking portal, confirmed the reference number, and printed the receipt. A yellow highlighter made a neat bar across the string of digits, and the page slid into a new sleeve labeled Restitution Posted. I sent the finance chair a 4-word text, funds landed, reference attached, and the reply came back like a hymn fragment. Amen. Paper clipped to paper, the day could proceed. That evening, the church called a special meeting. Under the fellowship hall's fluorescent mercy, folding chairs faced a table with minutes printed and waiting. The vote to adopt a 2-signer rule passed without drama. POA privileges were suspended indefinitely, pending investigation. An auditor from the mediator's shortlist was approved. Dates were set instead of promises. The treasurer pro tem thanked volunteers in a paragraph without names. I sat in the back row, took notes, and resisted any impulse to become the room's center. The work was finally wearing its proper clothes, policy, not personality. The audit began 3 days later. The independent firm showed up with scanners and soft voices and a checklist shaped like a ramp. They exported bank histories, requested access logs, and booked interviews with everyone who had touched the account. I rolled out the tidy binders I had built across months, the index that mapped each exhibit to a reference number, the ledger printouts with quiet question marks that had started this march toward clarity. They gave me a schedule and I wrote it on the calendar. Relief arrived as procedure, not applause. It fit. At home, the rhythms returned to porch and kitchen scale. Miles installed a slim pine shelf in the hallway, the kind that looks inevitable once it's up. I sanded and oiled it with strokes that remembered the shop and respected the back I now carry. Dinner kept to red beans and cornbread, baseball murmuring from the radio because the TV is too proud for work nights. The house felt provisioned rather than staged, order that did not ask to be admired. A week later, we let the porch hold a small evening. Aunt Nadine, Uncle Terrence, two neighbors who never overstay. A supermarket sheet cake with a single candle meant to be used, not photographed. Plates passed without ceremony. Laughter that forgot the internet was a place. I kept gratitude in motion, fetching an extra chair, topping off tea, offering the last slice away. Kindness eats best when it doesn't pose. Near sunset, Zara's car eased to the curb and stopped cleanly. She walked up the steps alone, no entourage, no phone held like a shield. Her eyes wore the kind of tired that has begun to learn. She handed me a plain envelope with my name in careful block letters. Inside, a factual acknowledgement letter addressed to the Finance Committee and a copy of the wire receipt, clipped together, no adjectives. Paper doing the talking. I nodded, and she nodded back. We let that pass for language because, for once, it was enough. Vanessa stood by the sidewalk, a deliberate half-step outside the porch light, posture composed. I offered a small nod, she returned it. Neither of us summoned the past into the present. When I lifted the cake plate, she declined with a quiet hand, the motion not sharp but definite. Boundary honored, not dramatized. Some repairs are built out of distance, held steady by keeping it. The neighborhood reflected us back more gently. A deacon had dropped off folding chairs that afternoon with a post-it that said, "Use what you need." A church mother left a foil pan of candied yams on the rail and a note that read, "For your table." Children circled on bikes. Someone's radio spilled a tired blues line that sounded like relief stretched over rhythm. The public narrative cooled on its own. Private kindness filled the space it left. Later, I brought out a wrapped set of chisels and a marking gauge for Miles. Clean steel, oiled wood, edges he would need. Tools as inheritance, not apology. He grinned and promised the hall bench we've been sketching for months, the one that will sit under the new shelf. A plan is a bridge, not a debt. We exchanged a look that said, "This is how we keep something true without announcing it." When the guests thinned, Zara lingered a measured breath. She asked, in a voice that understood scale, if I was still angry. I told her I had chosen boundaries, not anger, and that boundaries kept make room for love that doesn't have to audition. The porch accepted the sentence without echo. We agreed on the work remaining, cooperate with the auditors, adhere to governance, no optics maneuvers masquerading as reform. Then the air was allowed to be regular again. Inside, I filed the acknowledgement letter in a sleeve titled "Church Law Acknowledgement Signed," updated the exhibit index, and wrote a line at the bottom. Terms met, restitution posted, letter delivered, vote recorded, audit in motion. Satisfaction arrived as the feeling a joiner gets when a dovetail seats flush with no squeeze out. The work held. It looked like it belonged. Near midnight, I stood by the sink, hands on the cool porcelain, and let a short prayer pass without costume. I named processes, not people. Asked for stamina during the audit and mercy for everyone's learning curve. The house received the words the way a well receives rain: quiet, necessary, stored for use. On the porch, I relit the candle, then blew it out with no audience and no speech. The light pooled on clean rails. The street held that washed after smell that follows work done right. On the table, confirmations clipped together sat beside the auditor's schedule and the acknowledgement letter, paper that means something. I pocketed a folded index card with a prompt for tomorrow. What did the work teach? Then I turned off the porch light last and left the hallway light low, a soft hand on the shoulder of what remained. What the work taught me fits on one line if I let it: build it right and let it hold. The kitchen keeps the morning faithful, porcelain sink cool under my palms, kettle ticking a small metronome, a thin stripe of sun finding the same seam on the counter it found yesterday. The house waits without asking me to perform. I open the notebook and start where I left myself a prompt. What did the work teach? The words come without hurry, like screws walking down into wood under a slow driver. First, boundaries are not fences for anger, they are scaffolding for love. Anger burns hot and bright and leaves a shape you can't use. A boundary bears weight. The two-signer policy, the POA freeze, the audit, these are not punishments. They are handrails that keep people from tumbling into stories. Keeping them firm gave room for love to be ordinary again. No auditions, no spotlight, no crowd. In that room, affection can find a chair and sit without explaining its outfit. Second, stewardship beats spectacle. Social media knows how to amplify a feeling, but repair requires ledgers, minutes, signatures, and people willing to put their names beside actions a year from now. My Kyoto Post was a line in sand, nothing more. The real work lived off camera, account numbers squared, votes recorded, controls adopted. Even peace feels stronger when it's stapled to paper and calendar dates. Third, silence can be an instrument. I muted threads, archived messages, BCC'd counsel, and let documents speak in full sentences. That quiet was not sulking, it was curation. It let oxygen back into the room so facts could breathe without the strain of performance. I learned that a single clean page can outlast 100 hot remarks, and that a pause can build a longer bridge than a parade. Fourth, dignity has arithmetic. A self-funded ticket to Kyoto was not revenge. It was a ledger entry in the direction of myself. Absence made the boundary legible. And afterward, numbers came before narratives. Wire posted, vote recorded, audit in motion. Each step completed pushed breath back into its natural gait. I started sleeping through the hour when the mind likes to rehearse arguments. Rest felt like a receipt stamped paid. Fifth, inheritance is practice, not apology. I handed Miles a set of chisels and a marking gauge because tools teach a man to aim, to listen, to remove only what must go. He will build the hall bench we've talked about, pine to match the shelf, mortised legs set true. The bench will sit under the shelf like a promise kept low to the ground. You don't pick sides, you pick your craft, is a sentence he can carry wherever the work takes him. Sixth, accountability can skip humiliation. Zara's letter to the Finance Committee was factual and spare. It bowed to the right room instead of playing to the crowd. Vanessa's choice to stand at the curb respected distance that protects everyone from old habits. Mercy, I've learned, is private more often than public, and it asks less for show than for stamina. You let people become the version of themselves who can do the next correct thing, and you don't clang on the pan while they try. The mirror widened and steadied. St. Augustine's committee chose policy over personality and did not call me hero. Neighbors brought beignets and folding chairs. A church mother left yams with a note no longer than a breath. The hot narrative cooled on its own, and the space it left filled with ordinary kindness, the sort that makes a block feel like a porch, even when the air is heavy. Kyoto returns as an image, but now it feels less like a postcard and more like a tool. I see the sake glass, the stone lanes, the Kamogawa steps repeating in a measured pattern. The plumb line I kept saying in my head, plumb line steady, was not a threat to what leaned. It was a promise that what could be trued would be. I did not come back with souvenirs. I came back taller inside my own outline. I write myself a creed I can carry. Log everything. Rest, eat, pray, walk. Don't rush the cut. Don't starve the truth. The lines fit on an index card. I place it where the ledger used to live, not because the ledger is gone, but because the card is what I need to see first. A ritual, upgraded. Simple used to be a label other people used to excuse the smaller plate, the smaller seat, the smaller ask of care. I retire that version. Simple will mean clear, not lesser. It'll be a sheet cake because the cake tastes good and not because anyone forgot I might want more. It will be honest paper, clean joints, chairs put away after the porch talk ends. I reclaim how I let people speak of me. Not prop, not myth. A man. Life continues without needing my permission to be ordinary. The auditor's first status email says on track. Miles measures the hallway for the bench with a pencil behind his ear and an easy whistle as if time itself were sanding down the sharp parts. I wash and return the yam pan with a thank you note that spells thank you the way I say it. The house runs, the street runs, the city leans, and the plumb line holds. I say a small prayer at the sink without adding chords. Stamina for the audit, courage for the truth, gentleness for everyone in its path. No names, no stagecraft, only the intention to keep the line true. I open the door and let the day in, humid and honest. The porch light that I left low all night clicks off under my thumb. I pocket the index card and straighten the ledger on the shelf, and the room agrees with its own arrangement. Kyoto's steadiness folds into New Orleans' morning, a level held against a wall you can't see all at once. Living beautifully without asking permission turns out to be a matter of tasks. Call at 9, sign at 10, eat at noon, walk at 6. I gather the papers for the auditor and step into the day. The work is not loud, but it is mine. In the quiet after every storm, what remains is not victory or loss, but the truth that endurance builds its own kind of peace. Time softens the noise, and the heart learns that boundaries and forgiveness can coexist without applause. Healing is not a headline. It's the daily practice of honesty, patience, and quiet grace. Thank you for watching. Share your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe so more stories like this can find you.